For a no-show binding, cut 2 strips that are an inch shorter than 1 inch and 2 strips that are 3 inches longer for the other edge. So here I have my 3-inch longer piece, and these are my inch shorter pieces, so that I have a 1/2 inch reveal at the edge. To all 4 pieces, go ahead and press a 1/2 inch fold over to the back side. Pin the shorter pieces to the edge of the quilt, matching up the edges, and leave the 1/2 inch reveal on both ends and the fold facing up, and make sure that you put it to the front of the quilt. Stitch a 1/4 inch seam along the edge. Press it away from the front of the quilt. Alright, the next step is to stitch down this little bit of seam allowance to the binding piece, and we want to be as close as possible to the edge. So next we need to press this binding strip to the back, and we're going to fold over so that we're just seeing a little bit of the front right here. I'll move this up so you can see. Right at the edge, because you don't want to see the binding strip on the front of your project. Now I'm going to add a little bit of glue in the seam. I have no issues with using glue in my bindings, and this will help to kind of hold it just a little bit more because it is a thick seam. So I'm going to fold that over again. I'm going to give it a press. And I don't expect the glue to completely hold it, but it will help. Otherwise, it tends to kind of flip up a little bit. This is all pressed and ready to go. It looks really good from the front side. There's no show of that binding. So before I proceed with the next 2 sides, we need to do the hand stitching to stitch that down. I have my short pieces of binding all stitched down, hand stitched to the back. The front looks really good. And there's nice turnover on the edge. And we're going to do the same with the longer pieces. We're going to pin the longer pieces to the front side, just as we did with the short pieces, with equal amounts of excess on either end. We're going to pin this down, and we're going to fold this section around to the back side and pin that all the way across, and then we're going to stitch it. I have my longer binding strips stitched to the front, but there's a little bit of excess batting in here that we're going to need to remove to reduce the bulk. So I went ahead and I folded back the seam allowance, and I'm just going to trim that out. I've done a little clip right here, and then we're going to clip this just like that. So that reduces the bulk and will make this easier to fold around. Go ahead and flip up that binding piece, and let's give it a nice little press just to reset that 1/2 inch fold. It also works nice if you give it a little press on the edge. That'll make it crisper for when we stitch that down. We're going to flip it over to the front so that we can press that binding piece forward and get a nice crisp seam here. And then we'll take it to the machine and sew just inside that seam allowance like we did before. Binding pieces has now been stitched down to the seam allowance. You can see that little line right there, really close to the edge, and it went into the fold area, though I did not go all the way to the end. Once again, I'm going to use a little bit of glue in that seam allowance. I just think it helps to kind of hold it all together a little bit more solidly. Give it a good press, and I'm going to pin that, keep it in position. Again, I'm just seeing the very front. We'll zoom in a little bit on that. Can you see that right there? When you do your hand stitching, be sure that you're pushing this back piece under a little bit because you don't want to see that on the front. So we're going to be careful that we make sure that that gets tucked in there, just kind of like that. Everything is all hand stitched down. My corners look very nice. The seam is right there at the edge, and there's not a lot of bulk at the corner. And then we'll take a look at the entire piece, and it looks lovely without binding on the top.